very appropriate that it would be South Africa, the victims of European settler colonialism and apartheid, making the case against another similar scenario, deja vu, European settler colonial state. Now, I know that most Israeli Jews these days are actually of Sephardic or Mizrahi origin. They're not European, most of them. But from the beginning, the founders at the outset of that state were the European Jews, or some of them, some of the European Jews. How can you make the argument that Jewish people are indigenous to that land, but the Palestinians who've lived there for, hundreds of years, thousands of years, are not? How can you make this argument that you are indigenous and the other people are not? Surely more than one ethnicity or ethno-religion could be indigenous to a land. And what are the grounds for that argument? If you're a religious Zionist, then you believe that God gave you the land and other people were living in it. I was debating online and the Zionist was arguing we were in Egypt and then God gave us the land. Well, are you not indigenous to Egypt then? You could go and live in Egypt. You could go and live in Iraq. Didn't Abraham come from what is now modern day Iraq? So you're no more indigenous to Palestine than you are to Iraq, Egypt, any of those regions where Jewish people were living. So I don't get this notion that we're not occupiers, we are indigenous to the land. Jews in Judea are the indigenous people. Well, you lived there at some point. Your ancestors lived there at some point, or some of your ancestors did. And let's go back to the split between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi. How is it that in modern day, Jewish people from Ethiopia look Ethiopian, Jewish people from China look Chinese, Jewish people from Russia look Russian? So to claim that you're 100% Jewish and therefore indigenous to the Palestinian land is ridiculous. African Americans who have some African ancestry at least still look a bit African, with a lot of admixture from other ethnicities, and there will be mixed of different parts of Africa mixed together. So your so-called African Americans who have ancestry in West Africa and modern day Ghana, Nigeria, etc., they don't look exactly like the people that live there now, because they've been away for 400 years and they've mixed with other populations. But they still look more African than the European Jewish people look Middle Eastern, if you see what I mean. But it would still be a terrible idea to say to African Americans, right, you originally come from Africa, you can go back and live there, and on top of that, you can displace people living in Africa currently. You can push them out of their homes and you can live there instead. In fact, an experiment like that was done. The country of Liberia was so named because it was founded by Europeans sent liberated slaves back to Africa to go and live in what became Liberia. You can even see on the flag, it looks similar to the American flag. And funny enough, the liberated slaves that were sent back to Africa started living on top of in a more advantageous position, in a privileged position over the local indigenous Africans. And that's just by sending African people back to Africa after 400 years. Can you imagine sending Middle Eastern people, if they are from the Middle East, back to a part of the Middle East after 2,000 years and kicking out people that are living there now? And you can test the DNA to see where you come from. I've heard that DNA tests are illegal in Israel. But even those European Jewish people that have done DNA tests and say, look, I come from the Middle East, you share your DNA, you have DNA in common with the Palestinians, who also come from the Middle East. So this would suggest that the Palestinians who are living there now, 2,000 years ago, may have been Jewish. Many of them will have then converted to Christianity, and many of them will then have converted to Islam. As the populations changed in the region, people will have converted. So if it's only about DNA and nothing to do with your religious beliefs, because of course the Zionist movement was founded by atheistic Jewish people. They didn't believe in religion. They were just looking for a homeland due to nationalism, which was popular at the time. So if it's nothing to do with your religious beliefs, it's just your DNA, then anyone from the region should have the right to live there, should have the right to go back and live there. If you're a Palestinian whose family were booted out of Haifa in 1948 and you've been living in a refugee camp ever since in the West Bank or further afield, you should have the right to go back there.